Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk podcast is a unique conversation about psychology from around the globe. We bring you ideas from mental health practitioners and experts to keep you informed about the latest issues and trends. Topics include developments and research in psychotherapy and social sciences, hypnosis and mind-body treatments, meditation and spirituality, and new treatment modalities. And while you're listening, please take a moment to subscribe and give us a review at your favorite streaming site. It helps us to grow and further reach people with quality programming. And now, here's the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm once again joined by psychotherapist and filmmaker Alex Vesely. Alex is the grandson of the creator of Logotherapy, Viktor Frankl. Today, Alex will be catching up with me about his undertakings of the last 2 years. This includes his work running the Viktor Frankl Archives in Vienna, Austria, his work as a filmmaker, and the founding of the Viktor Frankl Institute of America. So, what have you been up to?
A lot.
Okay, we spoke about 2 years ago.
Yeah,
talked about your. Yeah, it's been a lot. Lots been going on since then.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, when it's regarding my grandfather's work, it usually ends up with a lot more work than one would think or expect.
Exactly. But, yeah.
In a way, that's a good thing because it kind of shows you how much it means to people and how many people are interested in working with it and inquiring about it. And so there's been a lot of that, just replying and responding to requests that keep coming in.
Okay, you mean with regards to the Logotherapy Association?
Yes. So in general, just training or interest or in some aspect, something from the archives or even just pictures. It's kind of constantly people are interested in learning more or in understanding some aspects. And it's kind of a journey for me too sometimes, because the archives are the Frankl archive. So everything that my grandfather kind of stored in this one room, which is up to the roof and paperwork. There's a lot in there that we don't even know what it is, because only about half of it has been digitized and organized. So things keep popping up, and it's kind of like a treasure hunt. You never know what you discover next. Amazing. So maybe for the people in the audience who aren't quite sure who your grandfather is, maybe you could fill them in and fill them in about the archives and logotherapy. Sure. So my grandfather is Viktor Frankl, and he's known in the U.S. primarily for writing a book which was called Man's Search for Meaning, in which he kind of put all his experiences in 3 years in different concentration camps. And he told it from the view of a psychologist, because he was a psychiatrist and neurologist. And so he had a different perspective, kind of an objective, kind of an outside perspective that he tried to maintain and kind of look at this phenomenon of such an extreme experience, which relates to so much in life that we have in common. All of us, we go through difficult life situations, maybe not as threatening and as scary as the Holocaust. But then again, there life and death situations are common. That's part of life. It can be an incurable disease. It can be crime, anything that kind of puts us in the situation where we suffer and we can't avoid it. We can't escape it. We can't just undo it. So he was kind of talking about these universal ways that we suffer, and also the ways in which people are able to deal with this suffering, to overcome even tragic situations, and to survive, but then also to live a full life again, and to survive and not be forever mentally incapacitated by even traumatic experience, which sort of was a lucky situation that he survived. So one of the misunderstandings that sometimes people think is like, he said, okay, well, if you have the right attitude and the right tools, then you could survive a concentration camp. No, primarily it was luck. So if you stood in the wrong row, or you met the wrong SS person, or you did anything wrong, you were dead the next moment. So, but if you were lucky enough to survive all that, your attitude and what connected you to life, and the meanings and values that you had, they mattered, and they make a difference. And we know that now it's been confirmed that in extreme situations, it's especially of survival value to adopt a attitude which is oriented towards the future, oriented towards those tasks and things and people that you want to connect with, and that are sort of waiting for you in the future. That is of central importance for your body and your psyche to survive extreme situations. And he knew that actually before he went into the camps. He could observe that with people. He was a psychiatrist. He was a student first of all of Freud, but not directly. He was still very young. He was still corresponding from school, writing letters to Sigmund Freud. And then he became a student of Alfred Adler, the founder of individual psychology. And then one day he said, there's nothing new I can learn from these two. I'm going to learn from another source. And he began observing and learning from his patients. He was a medical doctor. And so he looked at his patients and he tried to figure out what makes the difference that some people have a very difficult life, and yet they're mentally and emotionally stable, and others who have maybe compared to that easy life, but they are not doing so well. What's the difference? And he discovered that the main point is meaning. So that's
meaning.
My grandfather. No,
yeah. That's a very concise way to put it. Yeah.
How am I doing?
I think you know your grandfather really well, especially his work and his ideas. You mentioned Adlerian psychology. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the difference in the split between Adlerian psychology and what your grandfather's ideas were. What he added maybe to that and took away from it and developed on his own.
Well, I'd like to go back then to Freud, because Adler was kind of a disciple of Freud, and so he still was kind of very much rooted in the Freudian paradigm, which even though he would have disagreed and would have said, no, my ideas are very, very different. My grandfather actually said, no, they're not so different, because basically one of the reasons where they differed, and one of the reasons why my grandfather finally decided to leave, was the central motivating, the driving force in humans that they thought they had identified. And you might remember the pleasure principle. Sigmund Freud was very much about of the opinion that as human beings, we are interested in pleasure and in gaining pleasure and in avoiding unpleasure. Everything that's uncomfortable should be avoided so that we get a lot of pleasure in our lives. And if it's not pleasure, then at least balance, so an equilibrium. And that is actually an idea that is very dominant still today. Then came his student who was trained in psychoanalysis. So this was all there was. In the early 20th century, psychoanalysis was the only psychotherapy there was. It all goes back to Freud. He had started it and discovered wonderful things and tools that are very useful. But the central motivating idea, that was something that my grandfather and first Alfred Adler, his disciple, they disagreed on. And Adler said, no, I don't think it's pleasure. That's kind of everything that drives us, the be all and end all, but it is power because as children, we're kind of feel overwhelmed by all these grown-ups, and everyone is bigger and has more power. And then we try to to grow and become as powerful, even more powerful, and get power and control. And we try to overcompensate our own weaknesses. Now that word overcompensation, which is very public, common term that's used, that goes back to Adler, for example, the overcompensating of the inferiority complex. In other words, a phrase that he termed the inferiority complex that we're trying to overcome. So that made a lot of sense. And then he also had some other ideas, and it was already geared more towards, okay, there might be more than just the ego, and satisfying the ego and kind of eliminating every unsatisfied drive and instinct that's there. But there's also the world around us and other people, and we also want to bring ourselves into a community. That was an idea that my grandfather liked, because it wasn't all just ego. But in the end, the idea was still, okay, it's not pleasure, it's power. But in the end, it's still, everything we do is ultimately to kind of satisfy our ego and give it what it wants. And even when we bring ourselves in and say, help others, in the final analysis, we just do that so that we get something back, and that our ego is okay. And that was something that really didn't sit well with my grandfather. And he said, I don't think we're talking about healthy human beings at all if we say someone's just out to get pleasure, or somebody's just out to get power, and somebody's just helping others in order to just fix his own ego. I think that people are essentially, originally, when they're healthy, not even so much concerned about their ego. They are much more concerned about things and values and people in the world, and they forget themselves in a healthy way. That doesn't mean they neglect themselves or neglect their own needs, but they're not just doing everything in order to kind of have a personal gain from that. And only if they can't find something that's of meaning that's out there in the world, a task that needs to be fulfilled, something that makes a difference in this world, or another person to encounter and to love, for example, then we kind of we fall back on the lower gains and aims in life that are connected to our ego. So if I don't find a meaningful task, or if I don't meet anybody that I fall in love with, then at least I want my life to be full of pleasure or comfort or power or influence, to all that, to kind of have that. But it is already, in my grandfather's word, it's already a neurotic sign. It's already a sign of something that has gone wrong with that person, because originally we're not so much concerned about ourselves. We want to make a difference in the world. And that was something that he still wanted to bring into the discussion. And he said, otherwise, I completely agree with Adler and individual psychology. And he told him that himself, but it was Adler himself who said, nope, that's too much of that's too much of a change. I can't have that. So Frankl, you're out. And he never spoke with him.
Seems to be a pattern that happened in Vienna. Yeah. Back in the day.
Yeah, it was about ego, so it kind of fits into the whole.
Yeah, but it seems like your grandfather probably had good ego management. Sounds like he understood.
He did, and he never took it personally. So you never heard him say a bad word about either Adler or Freud. He took them for what they did, which was to pioneer. I mean, without Freud, there would have been no Frankl and psychology. Yeah. No Adler. So he started it all, but then he wanted to augment it. And I think he had more of a problem with those kind of followers who were sometimes more narrow-minded than,
okay. It seems kind of antithetical to his approach to life, but yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And he himself, in his later years, when there was a first generation of logotherapists that had kind of taken on his work, he said, "No, go ahead and improve it, and also tell me if you disagree." That was something I think that went back to that experience, that he didn't want to become that, okay, it's about me and it's about me being right. He actually invited a confrontation. He said, challenge me, because if you think that what I say is wrong, let's have that discussion and find out who's right. And, if I'm wrong, then great, then we know more. And this is really what the process that this is how it should be, because we're doing science. So I don't need to be right. It's not about that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one thing that we spoke pre-pandemic, about a little over a year before, bit before the pandemic happened. And I've noticed one thing that's been going on in my own practice and just amongst just people in general is that with all of this downtime and social isolation, I think that people are more and more seeking out meaningful things and meaning in their lives. And I think that maybe the busy kind of attitude of just doing things kind of on autopilot and working for money, maybe that will to money or will to power was kind of taken away from them for a minute. Have you noticed anything like, I mean, I know in your work and in your training with people, have you noticed any of this theme coming up and kind of more of a need for application of looking for meaning and kind of the logotherapy impulse?
I might not be objective, because I've been for years confronted with people who are kind of actively seeking answers to these questions that they wouldn't find otherwise. But you're right. It's often a personal crisis or a global crisis, some event that's life changing that brings us to the edge where we are kind of forced to look at things in a different way and to reorient ourselves and to get out of the automatized life that we've lived to that point. And that hasn't really changed. I mean, this pandemic made this more pressing to a lot of people, and a lot of people's lives have been impacted and have been changed. But you can see that we as humans are capable of dealing with change and with trauma and with the uncertainty that came with that. Because as a matter of fact, it's always there. It's always been there. We were just not so aware of it. People always died and die and will die and die from one day to the next and have some unexpected events happen in their life. That hasn't just started with this pandemic. And to be aware of that, to be aware of the transitoriness of the situation, and to also be aware of the gift actually that we've been given if our life was good until it changed, right? That is something that we often only recognize in a crisis, but it's not necessary, or when it's taken away from us. But that is not necessary. That shouldn't be necessary. You can also develop that attitude when things are going well, and I think that's something that is a chance there for us and for people of all walks of life and ages, and even for families or for children to see that, okay, I couldn't do the things that I could do before the pandemic now, and hopefully soon I'll be able to do them again. That's and I'm sad now that I can't do it, but that means that I was in touch with something of value, and I had something for many, many years, perhaps, that I sort of started taking for granted, which is what we do as humans. We take things for granted until they're suddenly gone. So with every kind of loss, what's connected with it and change, what's connected with it is a reason to be grateful for. Because if you have a reason to complain, you automatically have a reason to be grateful for. And just to keep that, to throw that into the into the, how do you say, the scales, right? Mm-hmm. When you're looking back, or you feel that you've lost something, and that is an aspect of loss that is sometimes overlooked, and it's also true. So it doesn't do away with the pain and the problem, but it adds something to it, which I think can allows you to make peace and to move on, and to open up again eventually for looking at what is relevant today, and where am I going, where is my path leading me tomorrow. Crises never take away all opportunities of meaning, they just change them.
Okay. So basically on a global scale, we have the opportunity as individuals and societies to reevaluate what we've lost, to maybe fill the void with something else, but also create more meaning.
We can grow on a human level from this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people are in the process of that.
Yeah. And sometimes painful, but very possible. Have you seen more of an uptake in interest in logotherapy? I'm not sure if this is a fair question, since the pandemic, or just in general recently.
In general, I think even more so through the pandemic. Yes. But also in recent years, I think it has to do with it's actually kind of interesting that people kind of, a lot of people discover logotherapy when they are in a crisis, and so it's kind of has this image of, when it's suffering, then it's, Frankl has things to say about that. He had things to say about other things, phenomena in life too, and logotherapy is a very potent form of therapy that can handle a lot of issues, but often a lot of people come in through the promise of, okay, here's something that might help me in a situation where it's going wrong, and maybe where things are going wrong. But maybe that's also, it's if you look at how he defined the meaning of psychotherapy, he defined it quite differently from many other therapists at the time. He said, it's not the purpose of psychotherapy to make people feel better. Again, you're back with the Freudian paradigm there, right? Feeling good is the be all and the goal. And I said, no. The goal of psychotherapy is, or should be, to make people strong enough to be able to endure suffering. So that means suffering is not necessary to find meaning. Absolutely not. But there is suffering that comes with human existence, with life. There's unavoidable suffering. And we all experience some form of suffering. But that doesn't automatically mean we have to end up in despair. That doesn't automatically mean we have to end up as victims. But we can find ways to deal with difficult life situations and undergo difficult life situations and come out on the other end as strong as we were, or perhaps even stronger. And as psychotherapists, that should be our goal, to help people develop good and strong, healthy immune system, if you like, a mental and immune system that is able to live life to the fullest. And that means not to break when things go wrong, not to fall apart. Yeah. Well, when you were talking about that, Alex, a couple things came to mind for me. This kind of like trauma therapy model that has been very much to the fore of people's trainings now. And it can be a good model to help things to alleviate pain. But my experience of working with people who have experienced complex trauma, or even just more acute traumas,
is that they tend to stick in as lessons. They tend to stick. And I don't think it's about necessarily removing the pain, although alleviating some of that can be helpful. But the pain is alleviated by the acceptance of it and the almost thankfulness for it, the understanding that the meaning creating that those events can give to you, right? I mean, there has to be a kind of a seismic but subtle seismic shift that I think that your father was approaching through or your grandfather was approaching through logotherapy. And it also seems to me that a lot of positive psychology, which is another movement, is focusing on the things that we do well, but maybe to the point of trying to help us do them better, cheaper, faster, to lead happier lives, but not necessarily healthier lives, because like you're saying, that kind of psychological or psychic immune system isn't the end goal. Building it up isn't the end goal, but rather making people feel good about themselves, which is transitory.
Exactly. The question is that he would always ask, my grandfather would always ask, was what for? So even when I was in the concentration camp, he said, survival that's not even the be all and end all. Because, if life isn't meaningful for some other reasons, surviving wouldn't be meaningful. So the question is, what am I living for? What meaning do I want to give to my existence? And when that is when that's an open question, then it can boil over. And that can happen not just in a crisis, but actually when the situation is good and when we have everything going our way. Because then, to have everything you need to live by hasn't yet addressed the question of what are you living for? And that's as important, if not actually more important, because once you figure that out, the rest kind of is a question of how. But, and you would kind of paraphrase Nietzsche, who actually never said that quote, but he kind of compressed an idea there that he sort of said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And that why has to be a strong reason. So that's really what he was working on with patients. Like, okay, let's forget for a moment the problems that you have now or everything that happened to you and all that, is creating this state of misery. So if that was not an issue, then what would you do with your life? What would you be doing right now? And he saw if there was nothing, then he knew where at least part of the problem was coming from. But really, there was an existential vacuum, as he called it. This vacuum, this inner void, this unresolved question, an unanswered question of what does it all mean? What meaning do I give to my existence? And the other thing, because he said, making meaning, he would always say, be precise about the language here, and say meaning is not something that we create. It is not something that we make. Meaning can be found, and it can be found only by each of us. It's a very personal process to do that, and so it's kind of forbidden to even suggest as a logotherapist, say, okay, well, do this, right? This is meaningful, because we don't know. That's something that's found, and you can find it. If you look closely, you can find it in a lot of situations that at first glance seem completely meaningless. But this is, again, one of the best abilities that we have as human beings, to look at something and even look back on something, reflect on something, say, okay, this is what happened to me, or this is where I went wrong. But the story isn't over, because I'm still alive. So what am I going to do with this now? Is there something that can be taken from this? What happened? Because you can't change it. If it happened, it's over. You cannot undo anything if it's in the past. But you can, say, learn something from it, or take some elements, or see how you prevent something similar happening in the future, or see how it can be prevented for other people. There's lots of examples where you see people who had every right to, just lament their fate for the rest of their lives. I mean, he was one of them, right? He could have done that, and it would have been understandable. But to say, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to see what I can do with this now, and if there's anything meaningful that can be taken from this, so that maybe in the future, the future looks a little bit better, my future or a future for other people. And that's always possible. And that's what we're capable for as human beings. And that's something where he worked as a psychotherapist to see, that your life is not over yet. You are free, even despite all the things that happen to you. And even though you have, scars like we all do, and there's trauma, and maybe you will always be affected in some way by what happened to you. So it's not to trivialize the suffering that people experience, and people become victims of all kinds of things every day, and that the effects last a lifetime. And luckily, there are therapies that can help to, techniques and ways to at least alleviate that. But some of that will never go away, probably. You can't erase everything. You can't undo everything. But then what do you do with it? And how can you live a meaningful life, which is so much worthier a goal than just, say, a happy life, a meaningful life, a life that makes a difference? How can you achieve that despite and with the suffering that you have experienced?
Well, I think, thank you for the correction of the language. I think it's inherent in the title of his most famous book, perhaps, right? Searching. It's an active, it's not making and having a product or an end goal necessarily, but a constant activity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the Institute you founded.
Yeah, so this was a surprising development.
Yeah, I don't think this was going on last time we spoke. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was just the right people coming together. And so I was introduced through a mutual friend to a lady who, and she told me, I have this friend who is very much into teaching and how the educational system in America needs an overhaul. And yes. She said, I think a lot of the things she talks about, they sound very much like what your grandfather said. And she's read his books and all that. So why don't you two meet? And so we met. And so we talked, and it was very much spot on. So she kind of saw the things that could be improved, and how the educational system in the U.S., but I think it's not just limited to the U.S., but and on the one hand tells us, okay, you're an individual and let's celebrate individuality. And on the other hand, it's all about standardized tests and how do you fit in, are you, which category do you want to be in, and how do you, always just chase the right answers and check all the boxes and then what? And instead of kind of turning it around, and which brings us back to meaning cannot be given, it can only be found. So how do you teach children and students to go through this life with open eyes and ears and be aware of the meaning possibilities around you and the uniqueness of those possibilities if you're basically trained to fit in? And so we exchanged some thoughts, and then she, in the name of the lady is Pam Roy, and she also has a blog where she talks about these things. And then she said, "There's so much that I find in Frankl's work that fits into this idea that I want to write a book with another friend of mine, more humble is her name." And so they wrote a book, and he said, "Would you kind of supervise and kind of check if what we're writing here is if that's okay and within the framework of your grandfather's work?" And that's absolutely. And so they did, and they wrote a wonderful book, which was called The Wisdom of Viktor Frankl, and where they kind of put these ideas almost like a calendar, so you can go through it in
cool,
day by day. And I told you, there's really not much that I would change to this book. So she really understood both of them, what logotherapy is about. And then out of this came the idea, well, with all these ideas lying around, and obviously there being a need for people to benefit from that, why don't we do a little more than that. And so we started the institute, the Viktor Frankl Institute of America, and just put it up in a very short time. And it's kind of there to give people or anybody who's interested a little introduction to what logotherapy is and what the work of Viktor is. I think everywhere I go, people say, "Okay, Viktor Frankl, I read the book," and which is wonderful. And a lot of people have kind of found something that has helped them just through reading Man's Search for Meaning, which is one book of over 30 that he wrote on the subject. And many of them still haven't been translated into English yet. So that's one of the other long-term goals that we have in mind. But to just make his ideas available to anybody who wants to use them. And it's really anybody. So this is not limited to psychologists or counselors, even, because logotherapy addresses those questions, those existential questions that are really that affect us all, that really make us one big human family. And whether you use some ideas in your own life, or whether you're an educator and you use that in school, or if you're a student, everyone can benefit from this. And so this is our mission.
Excellent. Are you doing any particular trainings or webinars or things like that with the institute?
Yeah, so there's an online course that you can take on the website. So you get those videos and you just sign up for it, and it takes a couple of weeks, or you can even do it in days. And that's kind of a basic introduction to logotherapy. And so right now in the works is a larger, more comprehensive logotherapy training course, but that will still take some time to translate. It's existed in German, unfortunately only in German for a long time. And I was trained just like any other logotherapist. I was trained. I didn't it wasn't given to me by my grandfather or transferred.
I'm sure he had other grandfatherly things to do with you, Alex. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, exactly.
Yeah. So, I'm curious. I do not know many logotherapists in the States. Is it nor do I know of any. I don't know of any other trainings that really are available, and it's usually kind of subsumed under existential psychology, right?
Yes. Yeah. There's not much happening in the U.S. Unfortunately, it's kind of gone away. I'm not sure why it's more present in other countries. My suspicion is, speaking to other colleagues and people I know from Europe or elsewhere, they did not suffer in the wake of the medical model subsuming everything in behavioral health. Everything has been dollar-driven here and pill-driven. Get rid of those symptoms and check the boxes. And logotherapy does not fit well into that model. Doesn't mean you couldn't standardize some things and check in and show results if you got audited by an insurance company or Medicare. But, it just, a lot of things like that, a lot of more humanistic or even existential, even psychodynamic therapies had kind of fallen to the wayside, and everybody's excitement about CBT, and nothing wrong with CBT, of course, but that's kind of just what happened. Yeah,
here in the States.
That might well be. Yeah. It's one of those things. My grandfather used to joke about it, and he said, logotherapy is never going to be out of fashion because it was never in fashion. And there's truth to that. Those people who want to find it, they do. So it's out there, and it might be a good thing. It's not. It's hard to make a lot of money with logotherapy because it was always conceived as a brief therapy. Mm-hmm. And it was also conceived, and I think that might actually be something that makes it interesting, because it addresses those existential questions, and because we're really connecting with the human personal level that is transmorbid, which kind of goes beyond the psychophysical problems that are. It is something that can be combined so well with other schools. Maybe not psychoanalysis so much, because the basic idea of what we are as humans is so different there, but with all other methods. Because if I talk about why would I even want to, I don't know, get rid of some eating disorder or some addiction, right? Why? Well, if you discuss these questions, and if you find a reason, it makes it all the much easier then. You have all the more energy to address the how, and then to take all those tools that have been developed over decades that are in the toolbox of, creating a new habit, behavioral therapy. How do I exchange a bad habit with a good habit? And all these tools that are there and that work very well. But I have to first, I've already made that decision that, okay, I want to change something about myself. Now, how do I do it? What can help me with that? And sometimes that's not even necessary. When people find out, okay, I didn't know yet, I hadn't seen a good reason of why I would want to live, say, a healthier life, right? But now I do. Sometimes they don't even need any tools anymore, because the motivation is so strong. They say, yeah, I want to do this. And what I've done till now, that's been in the way of that. That's been hindering me from doing that. But I'm done with that, because now I have a good reason. And but you can always combine it. So logotherapy usually doesn't, there's no contraindication where you say, okay, you can't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do utilize some of those concepts myself, and what I do with people, I hand out copies or refer people to read, the book that I know of, at least, because it has such a positive impact on people. Yeah, and it can really start things moving forward a lot faster. I think it kind of cuts to the chase, the questions that are raised in it and looked at. Yeah. So the Institute's going on. You mentioned the archive, and are you the main person at the archive? Is anyone else there?
Yes. Well, there are a couple.
Sounds monumental. Yeah.
It's mostly family. So
okay.
Yeah. I've been doing this for over 25 years. So I was still a teenager when I asked my grandfather, what's going to happen with all these? I was always a film guy, and I asked him, what's going to happen with all these videotapes and audio tapes that are lying around there? He said, don't touch them, because he liked things in order. So he really wasn't happy with people messing around with his order. But I said, they're not getting any better. And so I started just digitizing them as soon as that was possible. And that's been a process that hasn't stopped, because how it is when you start an archive. Once you're done digitizing, then that medium that you stored information on is already obsolete, and you kind of have to migrate data to another medium and all that. So, but it's kind of over the years, I've gotten more and more into it, and I've kind of fallen in love with this work, and finding new recordings, or finding something that he would say in one recording that he didn't say anywhere else, which is always fun. He kind of knew that he was often in the spur of the moment. His brain would just spit out something that was really good, and then afterwards, my grandmother or some students would say, that was pretty good. Why don't you write that down? And said, I forgot what I said. And that's why when cassette tapes became portable, he just put it there and recorded it, and then just filed the tape away. My grandmother put a number on it and description, and that's where it went. But it's over 1,000.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, it's really fun work. And then, of course, other people have made recordings, and they kind of bring them in or send something in, or say, we found something. So I just love this work. And then there's the paper work, which my father took on as a project, and because it's very much, it's not an easy work to do it right, because first of all, his handwriting was terrible, and secondly, you kind of have to know all the players and all the people that he was corresponding with when he just put on a first name, for example, and you have to do it a long time to really get into it and understand what means what. So my dad's pretty much doing that on his own. He's about halfway through with the paperwork, and it's going to take a couple of years, if not more, to do that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. But still, it's an ongoing project, and it will be there to help serve the public.
It will be there. And, my grandfather lived to be 92, which was kind of a miracle in itself, considering the physical. He wasn't the healthiest after he came out of the camps. There was some heart damage and all that. But he was constantly working. So that there's so much material that was created. And but we're at it.
What a wonderful output. And also the fact that you founded this American university so that the collection will be translated into English, hopefully, at least the books and maybe some lectures and transcribes and stuff. Yeah, so this will be a great way to keep the work of a great mind in psychology for future generations. Yeah, psychology and psychotherapy.
That's the goal.
Yeah. What a wonderful opportunity to be able to shepherd this some more.
Yeah. I really enjoy this work, and it's, as you say, that to find something that's almost lost, and just to make sure that people can access it, and that it's still there in the future. That's
and such a common sense way of looking at things when people get. When specialization in psychiatry and in medicine and behavioral health is becoming more and more the thing.
That's something, that was his eternal fight. And it's still, you can see, I wouldn't be doing this if it was just for nostalgic reasons or, historic reasons, but something that he really was able to do was to have a very, very precise insight into human nature and those, where everything connects, because he was a medical doctor, so he knew how we work on a cellular level, and what happens when you put in a tranquilizer, and that sometimes is necessary, or that's the best way to go. To the psychological, to be a psychiatrist and to know how to work with hypnosis, even, which he tapped into for a while, but then the other level that's even higher or deeper, depending on how you want to see it, but that specifically human level, which he called the noetic dimension, which is beyond the things that can be the levels or dimensions that can be affected by either our genes or our nature or nurture or our psychology and our emotional processes, and all that is in the psychophysical. But he said that's not where it ends, and all other forms of psychotherapy, so that's it. We have a body, we have a mind, and that's it, right? And both kind of work together and have to be in sync, or you have to fix something in the body so that the emotions are affected, or you affect the emotions and the body will heal. And all that is true. We have these connections that go both ways. But then he said that the most important part is missing, that there is a third dimension, which is the basically human dimension, where we are the person that we are, and where we are always free to decide, what am I going to do with those things happening in my psyche? What am I going to do with those things that are happening in my body? Only the human being is capable to, for example, say, I'm going to oppose what my body and my psyche want from me. I may be, say, hungry, and my body, my stomach is hurting, and all my brain is thinking about is food and how to get it. And yet I, as a person, decided that I'm going to not eat, and because out of protest, for example, right? I can starve myself out of protest. Only human beings can do that, to sacrifice something for a meaningful task. So that's kind of proof where you can see that we are not determined by our drives and instincts, as Freud suggested, or by our behavioral patterns that are just handed down to us and influenced by our parents or teachers and, the village, or even our genes. It's fascinating to understand how much of our behavior is actually controlled by the genes that we've been given. And all that is true, of course. There's no denying that. But we as humans always also have that freedom to pick an attitude towards those conditions that we've been given, the physical, the psychological, I might be a person who's easily fearful, for example, right? But I can still say, okay, I'm gonna take this challenge, or I'm gonna jump down that cliff into the water, even though my heart's beating up to here, because I'm a fearful person, right? Well, it might be easier for somebody else, but the decision is still ours, and that is maybe the most interesting aspect or dimension of the human existence. And this is where you can do a lot of work, and we can do elicit a lot of potential.
Well, the word noetic was eventually coined by the Institute for Noetic Sciences, IONS, out in California, which is kind of a branching off from the human potential movement that Abraham Maslow helped to found with some other people, and Stanislav Grof, transpersonal stuff. So really a lot of his work was kind of prescient of that kind of wave or movement of psychology and psychotherapy.
I think it's influenced that. Yeah, I don't think it's quite similar, the use of the word.
Not similar, but certainly it was a seed that was planted, and I think your grandfather probably, I couldn't say, but I'm sure that he's a deep thinker. He probably could see that as being a potential output from his thoughts, or a potential way to look at.
Yeah, well, he and Maslow
human potential friends. Yeah.
A lot of correspondence between them.
Yeah. So I'm sure it influenced humanistic and also transpersonal existential psychology.
It's funny. He once said, or a couple of times in the 60s, he said, whenever I go to lecture in the US, the reaction is, oh, finally somebody's telling us something new. And he says, whenever I went to the East, say India, people tell me, oh, finally somebody's teaching us some of the old stuff. Old wisdoms.
Yeah. Well, nothing new under the sun, and everything new under the sun.
And he said, I didn't invent things. I observe human nature, and I kind of put some names to what I see and kind of made it teachable, but it's essentially not something new that people haven't known, and sometimes even without putting words to it, it's something that you know is true in your heart sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about the archive, and I know I've greatly enjoyed a documentary you put together, Viktor and I, about your grandfather, and other people's opinions, and lots of great archival footage and lectures, right? And a way to kind of immerse yourself more into your grandfather's work and psyche and personality. And then you also did a book or a movie on Milton Erickson, which again, very similar ideas and maybe a little quirkier or strange ways of doing psychotherapy process-wise, but nonetheless, kind of similar teleological approach and helping people find meaning. Do you have anything else that's cooking as far as other projects with video or film? You knew I was going to ask you that, and I don't know how much you can talk about what's in the works, but maybe you can. Well, say a little bit.
There's several projects in the work. One of them is a mental health series, something that addresses. It's called Meaning in Madness, and so 2 episodes. Yeah, working with a company named Straight Up Films in Hollywood. And so the idea is to kind of address some of the issues that are the problems that are systemic and that have to do, or where conversations about meaning would actually be helpful and to integrate that where it's missing right now.
Okay.
But as always, there are people who are kind of waking up to the idea by themselves and saying, "Wait a minute, something's missing there." And the other is a film on my grandfather. It's kind of a biopic, and that effort has been going on for a while. It's been started by a producer that I've worked with, Mary Simaluka, who's since passed away. But it's a very big challenge to do that. I didn't think it was such a big challenge, but the life of my grandfather was 92 years, and he lived through a lot of things. And so it's almost too much to tell. So you kind of have to pick and choose what aspects to tell. if it's a movie that's roughly 90 minutes. So we're in the process of conceiving that and of creating something that's as close to what actually happened as it can be.
People might think that documentaries are easier to put together necessarily than like narrative film. But I have a friend who's a documentarian, and he's been working on something for almost 6 years now. And he last time I spoke to him, he was interviewed a lot of people on a particular subset of film, erotic thrillers, which were big in the 90s in the States. And he's like, it's such a small sliver of the film industry, but he's going through, like, I think he whittled it down to the first 4 hours of his cut, and now he's going to have to cut even further and try to edit.
What do you not tell? That is so much.
Exactly. Yeah. Tell the best parts, and what do you leave for the other reels, right? The outtakes. Yeah. And it must be difficult working on your grandfather's life simply because you know him and you know the material so well.
No, it's not. It's not.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the editing, the choosing of what goes in is the difficult.
The choosing, and I'll tell you a secret. I have, Viktor and I came out about 10 years ago, and I had about 30 interviews at the time that I'd done with people around the globe. And since that, I've done more than 30 new interviews. Okay. I just kept it going because I'm an archivist, so I never stopped. And so there might be a new version or an extended version or a part 2, because some of the best stories they only came afterwards. So, but it's really, and it's enjoyable work, and because I knew him, that actually makes it easier. It's not a burden. It makes it easier to when working with other people or hearing their stories, or on this film, on the feature film, I'm working with a writer. I'm not writing it. That would be that would be too close. You're right with that. I wouldn't take that on. But to know, okay, this would ring true, or this is what he probably would say or feel about this. That's actually easy and kind of really fun and rewarding. And I'm glad that I've experienced him well enough and long enough. I was 23 when he passed away, to still be able to kind of put him in the room and sense how he would react to something.
I don't recall, but did you actually ever interview your grandfather on film or video?
I actually did. Yeah. I did several things. One of the, when video became available and on a price that became affordable, video cameras, I actually uttered that wish that I had, that I so badly wanted a video camera, and that was actually a big no-no in the family to say such things around him, because he was a grandpa, and he would say, okay, well, how much do you need? And so I got this video camera, and I'm so glad I broke the rule back then, because a lot of the footage that I have of him I did with that camera, and some of the things are really, I'm using them now as resources to find stories that he would tell. And then, of course, not to forget, my grandmother's still around. She is 96 now, and she is in great health, and she remembers very well stories from back then. And from time to time, she'll tell a story that I never heard before. And now it's even easier, because I can just pull out my iPhone and just have her retell that story and capture it. But yeah, it's always a little bit of a treasure hunt. Yeah.
Well, where do you see logotherapy and therapy going in the future? I mean, you do have the Institute, which is, I guess, in trying to influence education, right, globally. Yeah. Don't be bashful. Don't be too humble. Do you see it as having do you see it doing anything? Do you see it like?
I don't need to be bashful, because it's not in my hands.
Okay, yeah.
Where do you think logotherapists?
Where do you think it's going to go? Do you see it affecting psychotherapy in general, or becoming more acceptable?
I think so, and the reason is because there's just so much truth in it. And I've seen, sometimes I go online on YouTube and I just, see what people, sometimes you have this, advice with problems and people talking about things. And I'm curious about those things. And some of the things I've seen just in the recent 2 years or so emerging is a lot of people are they're giving advice that is so similar to logotherapy, and they don't even know. And, it's not even necessary that they know, but I think, the natural evolution, I think my grandfather was a little bit ahead of the curve. He could see a little further and a little deeper, just like Erickson. We have those people in every field that are way ahead of the others, and kind of sooner or later, first people are ridiculed. First they're ignored, then they're ridiculed, and then everybody says, "Well, that's what we've been saying all along." That's kind of what's happening with Frankl. He wouldn't care. Positive psychology and all that. A lot of that is kind of taken from, let's say, inspired. He wouldn't care. He always said, the most important thing is that the people can benefit from it. And what got him really angry only was when people were kind of distorted or when people, that was probably the worst, when people were being treated badly by incompetent therapists. That got him angry, and that's really what he wanted to do, because he was interested in helping people overcome suffering, and I think he saw that a lot of concepts were failing, and that there was some need for improvement, and it wasn't about his name being or even it being called logotherapy, which even marketing wise wasn't the best name he could give it, because it's Greek, logos, and you kind of have to explain. But the concepts are there, and you see kind of this incremental process. That sounds very arrogant. Different schools have different foci on different things. So there's always progress on multiple levels happening. But when it comes to the meaning orientation and the acknowledgement that meaning is not just a luxury item on the side when you're feeling well, but know that actually meaning is front and center when it comes to how am I going through life, and am I feeling well? Do I have the sense that my life is fulfilled? You don't get around the question of meaning. And he was just the first to put it there. It wasn't a new topic. It was in poetry. It was in music. It was there all along. But it just wasn't in psychology. And we had this model which was always trying to reduce everything down to nothing but your genes and gene expressions, or you're nothing like your behavior. And so we will just put you in that box and kind of, give you these stimuli that the outcome will be better. That didn't happen. There was always this margin of error. And then stress, and a lot of stress is bad, and then little stress is good. But then suddenly you have people who have too little stress, and they should be well, but they're not. So if you take away that dimension of meaning and of values and of how do I orient myself, what do I want my life to be in terms of pointing beyond just me and myself, then it becomes interesting, and then it becomes that's where the potential is. And I think the realization is kind of slowly happening that these are the things that you need to talk about in the setting of being a doctor or being a therapist, and it doesn't always happen with Frankl mentioned, and it doesn't have to.
Well, it doesn't have to, but I think that I see more and more applications and computerized kind of like question and answer kind of things happening. And I've had patients who are in therapy with me, and they might use behavioral modification apps for something, and it's fine. But then I can actually get to the nitty gritty and talk about like the deep questions with them, right? Whether I'm seeing that through the veil of attachment, or I'm thinking more Ericksonianly with them, or more like existential, or providing them with man's search for meaning as a means to kind of like get to the nitty gritty. I think that the field will have to go back to that. I also think that with the psychedelics, if they get rolled out properly and they're not set back, talk about existential, tectonic shift for people. Like they have that, they have to integrate that experience. So they have to get to the meaning of it, right? What does it mean? What does their life mean? These are just different things that I kind of see going on out there. So the psychotherapist will have to be more and more working from kind of that meaning search perspective. So it's probably
exactly being aware that you can't separate a human being from that question. We come with that.
Yeah. So I suspect you're going to have more people at your doorstep soon. From many levels. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Alex. On that note, I really appreciate you stopping by once again. Can you give a URL or ways to find your films?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Viktor Frankl Institute of America, VFIA. Easy to find. And then there's the institute that has the archives. So you'll find everything on logotherapy there at www.viktorfrankl.org. Those are two good websites to start with. Anything related to logotherapy, Frankl, you'll find there.
Okay. All right. And your films?
And my films, you can find them there on Vimeo now. And one is called Viktor I, as you mentioned. So that's the one on Viktor Frankl. And the other on Milton Erickson is called Wizard of the Desert.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll meet again.
Yes.
Okay. Take care.
You too. You too.
Thank you for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know you can find us on the web all over the place? Well, maybe not all over the place, but you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, loads of places. Please look for us, and if you can, subscribe, like us, leave us a review, send us a comment, a criticism. Hey, we like to hear a lot from people. Go ahead, talk to us. That's why we're here. By the way, this is just a reminder to let you know that all of the material here is for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you do need a therapist or a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.